LT Quilters. Today is Wednesday, January 18th, 2023. And we're here with live chat tonight. It is 7 p.m. Central Standard Time, just so you know what time it is. Otherwise, we're going to be watching an upload of the live. And appreciate you guys being here. So let's see who is here. Lenora Baptiste saying good evening, Miss T and Quilters family. Vivian Calvi, hi T and everyone. Mary F. Went to Sonic for 99-cent corn dogs. Got home, no dogs. Back to Sonic's. We'll be back to chat in a few. Oh my God. Veronica C says, hello all T Quilters. So glad to spend the evening with all. Remo JS is here saying good evening, Mrs. T and Quilters. Thumbs up, show love and support. So thank you, Remo. Don Cunningham says, hello everyone. Quilt Gal, hi T and everyone. Just listening, working on my background for the boho heart. I'm way behind. And if you're behind on boho heart, don't worry about it, because I have a feeling that once people get started, it's kind of infectious how you don't want to stop working on it. So I think you're going to be just fine. So as long as you get started, I think you're going to enjoy the process, especially if you like piecing puzzles. You get tired of piecing the same block over and over again. It's just nice to have a refresher where you're piecing different blocks in this sampler quilt. So that's pretty cool. And Beb Dixon is here saying hello everyone. Veronica said her rent is paid. She has hit the thumbs up. Thank you, ma'am. Bonita Nance is here saying, hey, Miss T and everyone. Hello, hello. Zandra Odom saying, hi, T and everyone. Katie Kraft saying, hello, everyone. Joe Cormel Perkins says, hey, Miss T and my fellow quilters. I'm off and ready for the live. Yes. You're ready and I'm not. Sea Joy Creations is here saying hi everyone. Teresa McCormick, hello Miss T and all. And Pat Boo says hi T and everyone. Erling Butler saying hi T and fellow quilters. Tom Whittick Eckery saying hey T and all T quilters. Thumbs up for Miss T. Well, thank you, sir. June Hanson saying hi T and everyone. Kevin the Quilter saying, hey, Miss T and all T Quilters. Winona Mixon, Sandy Egger saying good evening. Winona saying, hi, Miss T and everyone. And her rent is paid by Sandy. Elaine Doucette saying, evening, Miss T. Happy to be here. Thumbs up tonight. Kevin says talking to somebody else, and Veronica is talking to somebody else. Well, guys, I showed up. This week has been just a week of doctor's appointments and things that had to be done. So I have been working on the boho heart, which you all know we're working on as a sew along group, and we are up to getting the whole group 1. Well, no, we're on sections 2 and 3 this week. We just started sections 2 and 3 of group 1, and I'm working section ahead, so that's why I'm saying we're getting group 1 completed. That's not true. Group 1 doesn't start until 2 weeks from this Monday that just passed, so we've got another week and a half before group 1 is to be completed. So yeah, I'm working a week ahead. I will show you on one of my things sections 2 and 3, and then on the other one section 3 has already been added to section 4, which I'm not showing because it's not due yet. And so yeah, that's what it is. And then I have been using my long arm for mailing and storage and sorting and cutting, and so I cleaned everything off the last couple of days, sorted things back to where they needed to go, And now I am in the process of, I started back quilting today. So I'm only a week and a half late, a week and 2 days late with quilting. So I do plan to drop off 2 quilts to a lady tomorrow, and then I have some other quilts I need to get done. I probably got about 10 quilts to quilt at this point, but hopefully I'll get caught up. I was having some issues today with the long arm, so that's a thing I can talk about. Um, Let me show you my boho heart blocks pieces first before I forget, and then we'll come back to long arm tips and stuff. So this, I showed you all section 1, so I'm just gonna fold down and show section 2 is right here. And we had section 1, all of this that's underneath was done the previous 2 weeks. And then this is section 3 right here. So, and this is the one where I'm doing the background as the author stipulates. And then I'm also doing another one where I'm changing the background. So that is this one here. And all I can show you is section 2, because section 3 is already on. And it's really not a whole lot to show, because section 3 is on the other part of section 4 at this point. So I need to present that to my sew along group, and I'm doing that Friday, so I can't show that here now. Okay, so we are busy working in the group. Got lots of people putting up photos, a lot of different variations. That's one of the reasons why I do love sew alongs, because if you're not comfortable in a particular color palette, seeing what somebody else is doing just might change your mind and make you more comfortable with that. So that's one of the reasons why I love doing sew alongs. You can see different fabric groupings, or say you never done a pastel quilt, and then somebody is doing one that's in pastels, and you end up liking that, and so it lets you know that you know, it lets you know what weaknesses you may have in your stash, as far as whether or not you can produce a quilt like that. So then it kind of assists you with future shopping. And then it also lets you know that you may be more comfortable in a particular color palette than you think. So that's what I really like about it. Let me welcome the other people in here. What is Kevin talking about? Pounds, she showed up. Janice Miller says, hello, T and everyone. Cynthia Shades here saying hello from cold Chicago. Dorothy says, hi, T and all quilters. My brother says, hi, sis and everyone. People are saying very nice, talking about the, I just got kicked out of chat. Okay. Talking about the boho heart pieces. Very nice. It's going to be beautiful. Hi, Phyllis G. She's saying hi, T and everyone. Beautiful work as usual, Miss T. Lenora saying lovely color. So yeah. Bonita says yes, future shopping. Yeah, you know, you never know. Like at one point, I didn't have orange in my stash, and now orange is one of my favorite fabrics to get. I remember that all orange used to be like the same value in hue. It was very difficult to get differences between orange. So I'm really happy with, you know, the stash, and that whenever I want to make a project, I don't necessarily have to go out and buy any fabric. That's the one thing I do like about having my stash. Let's see. Hey T and fellow quilters. That is from Sue GSD. And Don says your volume is low to me. I got it pressing Is it still low if I'm turned this way or when I'm turning another way? I don't know what to do. I got the mic on. I got the mic in. Hold on. I think Kevin was, okay. So he's saying that his volume is fine. Let me just make sure by pulling the screen down that my screen volume is up. Yep. So I don't know what else I can do. My screen volume is up. I got the receiver. I made sure it was all the way in before I put it up there. So I don't know. I still got sinus issues. And I have not charged this other mic, but I'll see if I can switch to it just in case. And Sandy says her sound is good too. I think this is the old mic. I thought they both were in here, but maybe not. Maybe it's in the smaller one up here. And I don't know, I'm gonna leave I'm gonna leave this other mic out just in case this mic isn't charged, because I haven't used it since I'm trying to cut one volume off before, one mic off before I put the other one on, okay? All right, hopefully that's better. Just let me know, Don. Everybody else was okay with the mics. If the mic goes out, just let me know and I'll put the other one back on. I am kind of turned a little bit, so maybe that could be it. Cynthia says, good evening, fellow quilters. And of course, T. Hey, Cynthia, Maria Phil. Lenora says, my fabrics is as customs in Port of Spain, Trinidad, West Indies. I got a notification today. Sue says, 524 days until retreat 2024 with the best bunch of quilters and the absolute best hostess. Yes, I have never enjoyed retreat as much as I enjoyed the 2022 Tea Quilters retreat. It's kind of weird. Kind of weird. Don Cunningham says, okay, thanks. My volume is all the way up and just watched other vids was much louder. Okay. Hopefully it's better. I changed it for you, Don. Rosalind says, good evening, T and friends. Your sound is good here. Sheila Gates says, I think they need to turn the volume up on their devices. Kevin says, you have a lovely Miss Trinidad. Oh my God, Miss Trinidad and Tobago at Miss Universe this year. Kevin loves the Miss Universe show. Oh, shut up, Kevin. She never enjoyed nor never had to shoot anyone until this past year's retreat. I absolutely don't recall any of that. And Benita says that's because we're a great group and we like each other. Right. It's amazing. I think part of that probably stemmed from us having these live chats where you get to know people a little bit. You really don't know people on social media until you get to meet them in person. And then the fact that we got to spend 5 nights, 6 days with said group of people. But it was just amazing that from the onset that we just instantly just clicked because of social media. So if you're ever afraid to go somewhere and you've been involved with a group on social media where you've been active in that group, I highly suggest that you sign up for something like that. Sometimes you can't find a friend to go somewhere with you, and sometimes you have to go alone. And when you know that you're going where you're going to meet a group of people where you've kind of been chatting with them in the chat, just know that those things do end up working out for the best. So this was a pleasant surprise for me that I think it was 24 of us got along with no issues, and everybody liked everybody, and everybody had a grand time. Everybody had the same opinions as far as the meeting of all the people. So it was just a great time. Um, mm, hey, Shaquita Pearson. Sue says, I've been to several retreats over the years, and this was by far the best. Over the days, it was just getting better and better. Yeah, and I think when I go to other retreats, I've never been to a retreat that was a week. I know they do have them, but most of my retreats are 2 or 3 nights. And I think the fact that we had 5 nights, especially with doing excursions outside a retreat, that I feel like my retreat needs those 5 nights. It does seem like a lot to invest in when you're first signing up for something like that. But with all the stuff that we did, we couldn't have done it in a shorter time period and then still had time to get to know each other, relax, have fun, that type of stuff. So I enjoyed myself. Joe Carmel talking about what had happened was, girl, we gonna take your phone at entry, okay? Benita want to know, is anybody going to QuiltCon? I am going to QuiltCon. I think that's the one that's in Atlanta, Georgia. No, I'm going to the Modern Quilt Show. Is that QuiltCon? That's in Atlanta, Georgia, in downtown Atlanta. I am planning to go to that as long as nothing happens to anybody in my family. That's my plan at this point. So I have made arrangements for me to go to that. My screen's going by fast. Darcy says, I would love more than anything to come to a retreat, but it's hard to go places since I don't drive. And I understand that. Zella McKenzie is here saying hi, T and Quilty friends from West Michigan. Yes. Hey, Zella. Linda Denton saying hi, everyone. Sue says, and the food was great. And Rosalind says she's going to QuiltCon. Bonita's going to QuiltCon, I guess. Sheila Gage is going to QuiltCon. I guess what these yeses are for. Bonita says, cool, we need to meet up. Yeah, I figured that I would wait closer since I think it's the last week of February. I have never been to a QuiltCon. Of course, I've never been to anything at the Georgia Convention Place, so I have no idea. But I think maybe what I'll do is try to do a meetup at one of the main entrance point. And then what I may end up doing is just have people maybe email me their cell number so that I can just do a text to those people that say that they're going to go. And then that way, if we're kind of lost and trying to find a place, I can figure that out. So we can all be in the same spot at the same time. Wash Your Hands is here saying hello, everyone. Miss Topaz saying hey, T and everyone. Shaquita says, I've been to several retreats. I have a good time wherever I go. Right. Don says, Modern Quilt in Atlanta should be fun. Jonah Crutchfield, hello, everyone. Vivian saying she's going, oh, yes, to the meetup. I think Rosalind is, too. And Bonita says it's her first time going to this one, too. Sheila says not going. Oh, just agreeing it is Modern Quilt event. Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, I don't have anything to talk about today. I've been busy with other stuff. Had holiday on Monday, and then, like I said, yesterday and today was just filled with appointments. So, and then I finally, and cleaning off my long arm area and boho heart. So that's all I've been working on. If you've missed the live chat on Saturday, I worked on those bowl cozies. I got 5 more to finish off. I finished 4. I just assembly line done the last 9. But I finished 4 of them so that I can get them to my mom's, which I haven't been to yet still. So, yeah. I've been putting out fires. So, Sometimes that's all your day gets spent with, um, putting out fires. So, hold on. Sheila says not going, just agreeing it's the modern quilt event. Okay. Sue says, and intermittently there was floor show with T, Kevin, and I don't know what she's talking about, and Joe Carmel. Sheila says, after watching the Soul Yell Quilt Retreat in Las Vegas with 75 people, I came home and was down with COVID. Oh my God. Oh, she said after attending. Yeah. Oh my gosh. And see, I tried to avoid that. We had an incident that came up with one of the retreaters that I had at the last minute that came up. And I was trying to make sure that everybody went home and nobody went home with COVID. But we all did pretty good. And I think also it's going to depend on the time of year of your retreat. That's another reason that I like to have the retreat in a summer month, because you have less chances of getting flu or pneumonia or COVID from somebody, okay? Oh, Joe Cormel's asking me what happened with the long arm. So, okay, we can talk about long arm stuff. Okay, but let me read these last comments. Kevin talking about pound, putting out fires. Mary F says, T-Quills, do you put regular batting in them? Yes, I just use regular warm and natural batting, and I have been using my bowl cozies since the very first video when I started doing them, which has been at least 9 months, something like that, with the AccuQuilt dye, because that's when I started showing them on here. I had done them before, but I had not done them with the AccuQuilt dye, and so I'd say at least 9 months. I've been using my bowls. My husband and I, we were the first users of the bowl. I put those bowls in there for 3 minutes to warm up brick soups. When I say bricks, they're frozen ice cubes of soup. And I put them on 3 minutes, and then I stir it because it's frozen, and then I stir it to get all the stuff back mixed up, and then I put it immediately back in for another 3 minutes, and I haven't had any issues with my bowl cozies catching on fire. Now, I have never put one in for more than 3 minutes at a time. I don't recommend going over 3 minutes, and especially your higher wattages microwaves. Roslyn says she went to QuiltCon last year. I wore my mask and had no problems. Yes, and that's the other thing. Whenever I'm in a group, I feel very silly. But whenever I go into big things like that, I always wear a mask. I don't care. I'll take it off for photos or something like that. But I'm just not walking around the entire time without a mask in a group where people are this close together. It's going to be a lot of people. So I prefer to wear a mask. When Kevin and I went to the Branson Quilt Show last year, the AQS show, he and I were the only two in there with masks. And it wasn't jam-packed the entire time, especially when we first got there. It was more spacious. And then as we were leaving, we saw Quilt in a Day people. It was 3 of them together with 2 other people with Eleanor. And they had their mask on. But it was people, some people probably thought we were strange and crazy and all of that. But, I didn't care. I wore my mask. Anytime I'm inside of a group where it's a whole lot of people, I'm just not taking any chances. And now anytime I'm going anywhere right now, I'm wearing my mask 100% because I just got a new baby and I don't want to give the grandbaby COVID, so I'm being very careful with that. So what else? Long arm. Okay, so today I was and I'm saying this because a lot of people have long arms, and I'm also saying this we can talk about just long arming in general. We got 30 minutes, so we can talk about long arming, because I think whether you have a long arm, or if you're interested in getting a long arm, or you have your quilts being quilted by somebody on a long arm, there are some things you probably need to know about the long arm. Okay. So today I was actually having problems with my thread was breaking, and I remember I just quilted, the last quilt I quilted was in December, where I quilted that color play or color shift quilt for my friend. And so I haven't quilted anything since then, and I'm already having issues. Hold on, guys, I'm gonna have to blow my nose. Sorry. I think I'm better, and then I don't take the next dose of medicine, and then it comes right back. Okay. So that's what's kind of happening, and it's just sinus. And I've been taking a COVID test just because I go around my granddaughter, so I know it's not COVID. It's just a sinus, and it's left over from when I had a respiratory virus. But so I did all the things on the long arm or any sewing machine when your thread is breaking. I rethreaded the machine a couple of times, you know, in between breaks. I cleaned out the bobbin area a couple of times. I took the bobbin completely out and reinserted it a couple of times, and just couldn't figure out why my thread was breaking. And it was breaking on my first pass. When I say pass, you have like this much room, or however big your reach is in your long arm. So it probably had stitched, I was stitching straight lines, well, curvy lines, like serpentine lines. And so I'd say it probably stitched about 4 or 5 lines. So that's another thing that will throw you off when it will quilt. 4 or 5 lines, and then all of a sudden it breaks, and then it'll stitch another 3 or 4 lines, and then it'll break again. So it was very frustrating with that. And I had probably, now I'm into like row number 3 maybe, where I've, you know, I advanced the quilt top on the take up bar about 3 times. I'm on the 3rd one. I only got 5 of them to do. So, and I'm still struggling with thread. So I have spent the majority of my day, after I got home from all the medical stuff, I've spent the majority of my day playing with thread breaks. And then it finally dawns on me that I didn't change the stupid needle. And it's amazing, because I know some of us, and I have to raise my hand, I'm not one of those quilters that they advise in every book, every long arm, the professional videos will tell you to change your needle after every quilt. Well, sometimes I'm doing a quilt that's only 40 by 60, and that's a lap size quilt. I am not going to switch out my needle for that. And then I think what happened is, because I haven't quilted in a long time, and the other quilt was a small quilt, and so I'm thinking that I can quilt the next quilt, but I can't remember if I changed that needle in that quilt or not. So I finally said, girl, change your needle. So I changed the needle, and it was actually the needle that was deflecting. It was just that needle had it, and there's no telling how long I had that needle in there. So making a conscious effort in all of your sewing machines, don't just check your thread in your bobbins, make sure that you're also checking your needle. Sometimes the needle can be a problem. The needle could have slipped down, and if a needle's not in the right position, is also going to give some kind of flexing at the point. It's going to be weaker than it would have been otherwise. So just keep that kind of stuff in mind, especially you long armers, because I was about to put the thing out on the out in the yard. Okay. And see, Joe saying she's raising her hand about using needle more than once. But I think you have to be cognitive of how many quilts you're quilting with the needle. And I'm not even going to try to give a magic number. But I know that I use my needle until my needle tells me sometimes that it needs to be changed. And then I'm thinking, okay, it's, you know, I've cleaned the machine. It's a pretty good needle. And sometimes we even forget that we haven't even changed the needle. For those that do change them with every project or so, you kind of forget. So just keep in mind that there are various different reasons why your thread could be breaking, and it's sometimes not obvious up front. Because, like I said, it was sewing fine, and then all of a sudden it would just break. To me, when a needle is bad, it shouldn't sew 4 rows and then break on the 5th row. So it was kind of weird. And see, Sue says, knock on wood, I think I'm on 6 quilts with this needle. And you know, I could be up there because it's not one of those things that I consciously change, like every quilt or even every other quilt. And I know that I've done at least 3 to 4 quilts. I can't tell you how many quilts I've quilted. But when you're having issues and you know that you're one of those quilters that don't change the needle, then change that first before you even rethread your machine and see if that's your problem. I'm just trying to give people some advice so you don't have to have a whole wasted day, well, half day, because I was gone half the day. But you won't have a half wasted day dealing with thread breakage when the rest of the quilt, once I change the needle, the rest of the quilt stitch just fine, okay? Just fine. Hi, Lady Crafts. You're welcome, Rosalind. Just saying thanks for the tips. And Vivian says she uses her needles a lot too. So Jason Lewis says, hi y'all, joining super late tonight. Hey Jason. Darcy says, I changed my needle today. It had been a while since I changed mine also. And I changed mine on my Bernina Saturday, I think. It was between Saturday and now because I know I've been sewing a lot. But I think I changed it Saturday before I did the bowl cozies. Other stuff, just talking about long arming since we're here. If you're somebody that sends your quilts out to the long armor, people think that long arm machines can stitch through anything like thick seams and all of that, and I'm here to tell you that they don't. I've had quilts that I've received from customers where, especially when I was quilting from the back and I was using the panto, paper panto on the back of my machine, and I'm following with a laser light, and it would hit a spot, and I'm at the back of the machine, and when you're doing panto, you have a very light touch. Otherwise, you're not going to have smooth lines. If you have a death grip on the long arm, it does the opposite effect. You have to have a very light touch, but be confident in the movement that you're doing. And so it would be times that I would hit very thick seams, and it would hit that seam and bounce off. And when it bounced off, because I'm got such a light touch onto the machine, that thing could go back the opposite direction of where I'm quilting. And then I have to get it and put it back onto a line. And when that type of stuff happens, because it's a seam, I just keep going. I don't go incorrect because it's that thick seam is in the path of the quilting design that you chose. And there is no way, there's not going to be any quilting design that's not going to hit one of those seams somewhere. And the chances of somebody finding it in a quilt are going to be slim as well. Unless you're like specifically looking, or if you've got it like hanging on a wall and it's right at eye level, something like that, then it would be a little different. So I'm here to tell you that hopper feet are about, if you stack 3 business cards on top of each other, that's how high they recommend the hopper feet be off your base, about that amount. So if you've got really thick seams where you've got an 8-point star and you've got these seams going all directions and bouncing back into each other, if you can feel a knot on top, guess what? The sewing machine is going to feel that knot on top as well. So whenever I'm doing blocks like that have like seams like half square triangles or flying geese, and I have 4 of them coming into the center, I always tend to press those open. Another thing you can do is you can use a tiller's tack. You can go buy one that's very expensive. These people that are manufacturing them, or you can just go to the store and buy a tiller's tack by June Taylor, be a lot cheaper. You can also just use a piece of wood, a hard piece of wood that you might have available. And all you're going to do is just press that seam with steam. Hold the iron there with steam, get it really hot, and then you're just going to put that piece of wood on, and then you're going to press. And then you can either sit something on top of the tailor's tack or just hold it in place until it cools. And then that would make it that those seams are a lot less hilly. A lot less hilly. That's one of the reasons why when I'm piecing, you all always, I sometimes will show you all the back of my quilt pieces, because I want you all to see that my back is as neat as my front. And I don't press my seams open all the time, but when it's necessary, I do press my seams open. If I'm making miniature blocks, I'm going to press all of those seams open, because it's going to be so many seams coming together in the miniature that I would want to make sure that it stayed nice and flat. So that's one of the things that I do recommend for people that are sending your quilts to Long Armors. Another thing is, and I have had this occur a couple of times, where when you put on a piece border on your quilt top, whether it's going to a Long Armor or you're quilting it, it doesn't matter. Whenever you put a piece border onto your quilts, say just like those little the little strips you put out there, different color strips, doesn't matter what the pattern, what it is you're doing, I always stitch a straight stitch 1/8 of an inch away from the edge, all the way around the quilt top. Now, sometimes I will make it easy on myself, and I will stitch the outside edge of my border before I put it on the quilt. So then that way I don't have to do around the whole thing. And then when I put my sides on first, so I do my outside pieces of the sides first. I already know which one's going on the left, which one's going on the right, and I know which one's the top and bottom of those borders. So I just go ahead and stitch my stay stitch on the outside before I even put it on the quilt. Then when I do the top and bottom, you've got the sides that you've got to go and then do the tops of the border. So you've got that very top, however wide your border is, you've got to stitch that part. So it's like you're stitching a box without the bottom on it. And then I do that for my top and bottom as well. What does that do? When you put stuff on a long arm, we're putting slight tension on it, because we want to make sure everything stays nice and flat. We're not 100% perfect piecers, so every once in a while you're gonna have some fullness. We need to know where that fullness is before our hopper foot finds it, and then make your quilt have a crease in it. Some fullness we can quilt out. Know that all fullness do not quilt out. Some fullness, if you got one little spot that's a little bit full, when we base those sides down, we need to know where that is, and then we can see it when we're basting your sides where the quilt is moving. We just need to know that where that stuff is happening, so when we start to quilt that, we can put a little bit of pressure with our hand into a certain spot, so when it gets to quilting that, we know that it's not going to pucker right there. There are some other tricks that we use as well to do pucker control, or when stuff isn't quite square. We have some other tricks that we use as well. But basting around that outside edge of your quilt will prevent your quilt from coming apart. There's times that I've had customer quilts on my machine, and I can see where it's coming apart. It's in an inch that it has come loose from the border on the piecing, because they didn't stay stitch around the outer edge. And so you could have some bias edges out there, and stuff just starts moving. You've been handling it, you're showing it to everybody. Piece quilts are normally heavier than when you have piece quilts and then piece borders, they're normally heavier than regular quilts as well. So all of that stress is being put on the outside edge of your pieces, and some of them could be having some bias on them, especially if it's a scrappy quilt. So just be aware of that. Stay stitching is your friend. Kevin saying that it's 100 people, 109 watching, and only 53 thumbs ups. Come on, T Quilters, show the love and thumbs up. So thank you, Kevin. Sharon Lewis is here saying hi, T and Quilters, listening while it works. So that's pretty cool. Like that, saying hello all. Sue says she used a wooden plaque about 12-inch square with a command hook in the middle as a handle, and that's a good idea. It's like you don't necessarily have to always buy something. The reason why you're using a piece of wood is because the wood will absorb the heat that you just put into that fabric from the iron, and it's going to help take some of that moisture out that you put in. So, see Joy saying, thanks for the reminder. You're welcome. June says she paid the rent when she came in. So thank you. So other things with long arms, square. I talked about that a little bit. I got a quilt one time that every time I rolled the quilt, first I'm like, okay, this is a lot, but I can deal with this. It was like 1 inch that I was trying to make fit in to be square. um on a quilt top, 1 inch. So like I said, we got tricks. And so then I did the second row. I had 1 inch on one end, and on the other end I had 3 inches, 3 whole inches in between a pass where this quilt is not square. And so I had to pull out my bag of tricks. One of the tricks is to wet the quilt. Some people use water, some people use starch. I use a combination of water and starch, and I'll spray the quilt top. And then you know what I have to do, because it's on the frame? Some people will iron it. I don't use an iron once it's on my frame, because I don't want to press in the weight of the iron, and I don't want to be sitting there gaining carpal tunnel because I'm holding the weight of the iron in my wrist either. So what I have to do when that happens, I'm losing money and I'm losing time, because I have to go and let whatever I just put on that quilt, and I'm talking about it is wet. When you got 3 inches you're trying to draw in, I'm putting a lot of starch or water onto this quilt top. So then I've got to go let it sit. And the other thing I got to worry about is, will this quilt run? So if it's a red quilt, I can't do it, because I don't know if they pre-washed their fabrics or not. So why is a quilt off like that? Why is a quilt, when I just rolled this amount of section, why is it 3-inch difference from being square? I'm seeing puckers. When I'm saying 3 inches, I'm seeing a pucker that's like this, that's got this big wave in it. And the reason for that is because people sew borders onto quilt tops without measuring your quilt top. I'm sure I have videos where I'm showing you all how to put borders on quilts. I'm sure I have mentioned that when I'm here sewing live with you all and I put borders on quilts. I know the measurements of my quilt. When I cut my borders, guess what? I cut my borders to the measurements of that quilt top. And then when I sew the top and bottom on, I add whatever I need to add from sewing the side seams on. I add that amount, and then I know what size my top and bottom borders should be. I plan all of that out before I even start sewing the first border on. I already know what I got to cut for everything. Then when I put that border on the quilt, it's cut to size, number one. Number two, I pin. You need to pin your borders. I take my border, I fold it in half at the ironing board, I put a crease at the half mark, and then I fold it in half again. So now I've got 4 marks. I've got the center mark, the 2 in the ends, and then I also have the ends. I got 5 marks. So I've got the center mark, 2 in the middle from center, and then the ends. And then when I pin my border on, I go in about 3 inches, make sure that it's evened up with my quilt top. I go in 3 inches and put a pin. The reason I put 3 inches in is because if I have to ease this border in, I don't want the first 3 inches or the last 3 inches to be stretched. I want it to be stretched in the middle, or the fullness to be taken in the middle. And I put pins on 3 inches in from each end. Then I go to, and I have those same press marks for center and the 2 away from center, half of center. I have those same press marks on my quilt top. And then I match up those 3 pins. So I've got 5 pins in this quilt now. And then I go in between 2 pins, and I make sure that I pin in between those pins and put more pins in. A lot of people do not put pins in when they do borders. It's like pins, they abhor pins. Pins are your friend when you're putting a border on your quilt. You need to use pins. Even when you cut your border to size, you need to use pins. Never put a border on without pinning it. And Dorothy says, would you be able to use a hair dryer to dry it? That I don't know. I haven't done that. But that's, it just takes time. And so I have to go and do something else, or I'm watching television while I'm waiting for this stuff to dry. But it does take time when I have to try to take in fullness off of a quilt. That's one way I do it. If it's only an inch, I don't have to spray anything, because I can make it when I'm sewing, basting my edges, my sides down. I know how to take in fullness as I'm stitching on my long arm. So I do know how to take in some fullness. But if it's a lot, I can't take in 3 inches without using some starch. So, yeah. And, I never charge for that. And I am considering going forward that I'm going to start charging for that, because it does take me more time. Your quilt is on my frame a lot longer than any other quilt. And so that's one of the things I think. And I haven't had that problem. Now, what I normally do when I have a person, because I sometimes will quilt for new people, and it's not anybody whose quilt tops I have here currently. Okay, so don't think this is you. These are quilts that I've quilted over the years that I'm just referring to. I will take, I done lost my train of thought now, because I'm trying to do a disclaimer. But, when I'm doing customer quilts and your quilt is on my frame a whole lot longer, when I thought I was going to be doing 2 quilts today, and now I'm only doing 1 quilt, because I am sitting here wetting your quilt down so that I can shrink your borders in, I think that's something that people need to pay for, the extra time. And I am doing extra work that I don't have to do on everybody else's quilt. Now, one thing that I have done, and it has decreased a lot, is whenever I have gotten quilts with borders, I don't contact the owners or nothing, because they could be a brand new quilter, and the main thing is that they got a quilt made. So I never contact them or try to make them feel bad. And I'm having issues again with my nose, guys. Hold on. It's like I got one little spot that won't clear up in my nasal passage. And that's what my problem is. And what I do is I just go to my computer and I go to any website that's showing you how to put borders on. May not be the way that I do it. And I just insert those instructions into their quilt top when I give it back to them. And I put it inside the quilt top. So when they open this quilt up to see how pretty the quilting is, they've got this piece of paper in there explaining. And I did one time have one lady call me and ask me why was it in her quilt. And then that's the time to do education and teaching. When you're a long armer, you don't want to get somebody's quilt and make them feel bad. You don't know what people are going through in their life. The easiest thing to do is just to put some instructions in there. Don't even say anything. Just put it on in there. And it has worked for me the times that I've had to do that. And then my next quilts from that person was a little bit better, I couldn't find any website that actually showed where they put it on there exactly how I do, but I found something close. I said something is better than nothing. So as a long armer, be kind when you're telling people what's wrong with their quilts as well, because you just never know what people are going through. So, hey Sheila D. And Lorraine Hall says, I need to learn per inch. On your machine, so long arms don't have this platform unless you put it on. So if I'm not doing ruler work, I don't have my platform on. You do need to have, if you got a ruler work thing on, you do need to take it off. There's 2 tricks you can do to ease in an inch in a pass like this. If you have an inch that's full and you're trying to ease that in, the first thing you can do is, instead of basting your sides from the top to the bottom, you want to baste from the bottom to the top. And when you do that, your long arm, the second thing I do is I put my hand right in front of the long arm, but not on the long arm, but in front of this. Right in front of that, I press the fabric down. And then as it's going backwards and stitching, I'm pressing down in the front, and it's going to ease in and pull up the fullness that's behind it. By the time you get back up to the point where you've already rolled the quilt and you get back to where you did the previous basting, then that fullness is gone if it's an inch or less. And I could probably get a little bit more in, but I'm not going to get 3 inches in that. P. Gilliam says, evening all, this is good info. Thank you. And I can't remember if I read Sue's or not. Amen, T. I never just slap borders on. I always measure. Yes, yes, and yes. Yes, yes, and yes, and yes, and yes. Always measure your quilt top. If you know that your blocks are, say you're making a quilt and you're making 12-inch blocks, and your 12-inch blocks are not coming up to be 12 inches. They're 12 1/4. So everywhere in that quilt, your quilt is going to be short by 1/4. So you can't just go by what the instructions are telling you to cut this border this particular size after you've sewn these 12 blocks together. So if you got 3 going one way, you've lost 3/4 of an inch. If you've got 4 going down, you've lost a whole inch because your blocks are short. And then you go put this border on here that's you cut it the same size as what the instructions told you to cut. That's not going to work. That's not going to work. You need to measure your quilt tops. If you know that your blocks are the same size as the instructions, you don't have to measure your quilt top. You can just do what the pattern is telling you to do. I'm pretty spot on with 1/4 inch when it comes time to measuring my quilts. They tend to measure exactly what I'm doing. So I cut my borders to the size my quilt should be. And then when I'm putting that border on, with me pinning the way that I'm pinning, I'm actually blocking in that border to fit, and I'm easing that fullness. So say if I was an inch off, I'm easing that inch along the whole border instead of putting it in one spot right here. You cannot tell that an inch has been added into a quilt if you space that fullness throughout the entire quilt top. That's what you're trying to do. Any fullness that you have, you want to spread it out, not put it in one part. Jason says, I learned that after I quilted my first top. I had so much fullness in the border, and since I was quilting it, I saw all of the headaches that came along with that fullness. Exactly. And people, you know, we have this thing as long armors that we can quilt it out. Well, we can quilt out some things, but we can't quilt it all out. There are some things that we do, and then some of them are headaches. Like I said, when I have to do the spray starch and wet your quilt, and some people do use a heated iron and they press it so that they can keep going. I'm not going to do that because I feel like I'm going to have carpal tunnel. I worked as a desk job for 30 years. I'm still doing desk work and crafting with my hands. I'm going to have carpal tunnel at some point, I believe, because I'm having issues already that they can't find yet. They don't see it. But I'm saying I'm not going to be doing anything that's going to be making it that I may have an issue with ironing. I'm not holding all of that while I'm trying to do somebody's quilt. No, I'm just going to spread and I'm going to go somewhere else and not be happy, but I'm going to do it that way. And I haven't tried a hairdryer. I have not tried a hairdryer. June says, thanks for sharing this info. Very helpful. So Terry is here saying, hi all. Hi T. And if there's some long armors here and you got some tips you want to share, that's fine too. Nicole Baldwin says, oh Lord, I send my quilts off and I bet mine are wonky. Yeah, once you know and realize, like I said, if you got a great long armor, she's just not going to say anything. She's going to do what she can. And there are going to be a time or two where you're going to get a pucker in your quilt. And when I get a pucker in a quilt, I don't worry about it. I just keep right on going because it's not my fault. I've done everything I can to not have it pucker. And so, but that's, like I said, I would just put some instructions for things that I think people might need to know. Um, you got a great long armor if you've been putting them on there, and then maybe your quilts are to size. So if you want to open up a conversation with her and just say, how is your piecing? Because when I sent my quilts out to be long arm, my person came back to me. I didn't even know. And that's how I learned some of this stuff. She was saying, I never mind quilting your quilts because your quilts are always square. And the other things that I did is when I gave her my quilt top and my backing, I always put a note on it, and I put at the top of my quilt top that this was the top. And then I put on the backing that this was the top of my backing. You know why that's important? Because you could get a quilt back and the quilter not realize that you've got a directional print. It's not really obvious or she hasn't really looked at it because we're putting the backing on wrong side up. And so she said she always loved the fact that I always put what was the top of my backing and what was the top of my quilt top. Now, I haven't had anybody do that. I'm one of those, at certain things I can be anal about. And I know when I get my stuff back from somebody, when I've lost control, because when you give your quilt to a long armor, you sort of kind of lose control. And so the final control that I had was to make sure that when she put my quilts together, that she had my top with my top. And so that was one thing that I did. I have never seen anybody else do that. That was just something that I did because I wanted my, let me stop this. Because I wanted to make sure what I wanted at the top. And I always make square quilts. So if she had turned it the other way, oh Lord, I probably would have passed out, okay? Because I tell you all, I make quilts for my queen bed, and they're always 96 inches square. So yeah, I would have just passed out and died if she had turned it 1/4 turn. Hold on. That is great of you to do that. You are so helpful. Yeah, I always, instead of me like making somebody have a bad day, my intention is never to make somebody have a bad day. But sometimes people need to be aware. And so my way of making people aware was just to put some instructions in. Wash your hands, yes, because they will think everyone gets the instructions so they're not being picked on. And like I said, I let them come back to me. One lady did come back and said, why did I have border instructions? And she was the one that had the 3 inches. And every time I rolled, it just kept growing and growing and growing. And so it was just a nightmare. But if you looked at her quilting on her quilt, you would have never known that that quilt was as bad as the hard work that I put into quilting that quilt. And I didn't charge her a dime extra for that. But I was really intent that she was going to get some instructions, but I wasn't going to beat her down because she's a new quilter and she is making quilts. She is sewing. Most of us are doing this craft because it's relaxing, because it's soothing, taking us away from the real world problems. You never know what people are dealing with. They could be taking care of somebody in hospice. You just never know. And so my intention, like I said, is never to make somebody have a bad day because I'm frustrated. Yes, I'm frustrated. They don't know any better. And if you tell them and they still do it, then I, as a long armor, can say, I can no longer quilt your quilts for you if it's going to continue to be a problem. I have a right to say, no, I don't want to quilt this, if somebody is not learning and not willing to pick up some tips. So I've never had anybody that I've had to, like, once I put instructions in, I've never had somebody that I had to say, I'm never going to quilt your quilts again. I've never had that happen, with or without any notes. Because sometimes I quilt your quilt the first time or two, I may not even put the note in there. Believe you me, because most times I'm thinking maybe she's only going to have me quilt her quilt this one time and I won't see her again. Well, then the second time she brought me 3 quilts, and so I was grateful that she trusted me to quilt 3 quilts, and I'm like, okay, so I'll quilt these quilts. Maybe she's taking classes. You don't know what people are doing. And all 3 of those quilts were bad. And so then I got another quilt from her, and I'm like, okay, so she really doesn't know how to do borders. And then when I started talking with her, learned that she was teaching herself. She hadn't had any classes. It was her relaxation. And so it was a whole nother, whole nother perspective. What if I had just really just went off on the first quilt that she gave to me? She probably would have never made another quilt, or I wouldn't have long arm quilted it. Okay. you know it is what it is. So I just let people go unless somebody is asking me, for the most part. But then if you come back with a return, then I start considering that we need to do some education here. Sandy says priceless tips. I recently made a quilt top, and by some miracle it measures up perfectly. I bet it never happens again. And that's, if you've been quilting for a while, your quilt will probably measure up almost perfect or perfect, because some of mine do come out perfect and some of mine might be a 1/4 inch off somewhere. I've been quilting a long time, so I know all the tricks. Like when I'm making my blocks, and if I have sashing, I make sure I block my sashing as well. I don't just sew sashing onto my blocks. So as I'm working, I'm bringing that quilt back to the size it should be. So say my 12.5 edge to edge unfinished blocks are only 12.25. I will still sometimes go ahead and cut my sashing 12.5, and then I will block that piece, as I said, by pinning, and then I'll set it with my tailor thing. And so I'm pulling that quilt back up to the size that it should be, because every once in a while, especially on sampler quilts, you can end up with a block that's just too small. It happens sometimes. The more pieces that are in a block, the more chances you have of not coming out with that block being the perfect size. So I don't cut my border until my quilt top is all done. That's Darcy. And you shouldn't. I don't cut mine until my quilt top is done, but I know when I'm making my quilt top, if I know that it measures up to what everything is, then I can use the instructions if I'm using a pattern to put that border on. Otherwise, you need to wait and see what size your quilt top is. You are correct. I always wait. I don't pre-do my borders. I'm saying I cut all 4 of my borders at the same time. That's what I'm saying. Because I know what size my quilt top is. And Nicole says, I will ask her, my blocks have been off and I have had puckers. Thank you for explaining this. And see, and she's just quilting. And us as long armors, we're not at the point of education, because you have sent us a quilt top. We're at the final stages. Now, there are some long armors out here, and I'm in groups where people are just outright rude and mean when they return a quilt to a customer. And some of them won't even do your quilt at all. Me, if I find that I have a problem with your quilt, and if I feel like sometimes we don't know until we load a quilt that it's really bad. Now, sometimes that's out of my control, but if I can see it before I even load it, when somebody give you a king size quilt, I have no place to open up a king size quilt. So I'm not going to know until I'm stitching that thing that it's bad. I'm going to make a square line on top. I make a line with my channel lock on top of my batting and backing, about 1 inch down from the batting and backing. I put a channel lock line from one end of the quilt to the other. So that's my square up line. Then I put the quilt top on top of that, and I pin it to make sure that it's not going to move. And then as I'm basting that quilt top along that line that I've stitched, I'm making sure that I'm easing in anything that's happening across the top. Most times I don't have the fullness on the top. It starts to hit when it gets to the sides. And if you don't take care of the fullness as you're rolling, then your bottom is going to be cattywampus. So, and you don't want that. Your bottom could end up being 3 or 4 inches skewed if you don't take care of the fullness as you're quilting. So if you got puckers in your quilting, you need to talk to her or use some of these tips. I think it's your borders not being put on the quilt. You need to measure your quilt before you add those borders on. So thanks for being honest, Nicole, because a lot of people won't do that. So, and then you're learning something too. And she says, Betsy Lou says, I fold my quilt top in half and use that fold edge as the measurement for my borders. I do that for all borders and press them flat as I go along. Yes, and then I was telling them you might want to fold in half again because you want a quarter. If it's a bed-size quilt, just doing half is not enough because your arm cannot reach that far. You need to fold it one more time and put another press fold in there so you know you have 2 more places plus the edges that you're going to line up your border. Hi, Diane57. Katie Craft says, I was so nervous the first time I sent the quilt to the Long Armor. Cynthia says, we learn something new every day. Right. And Sue said, let's talk about pressing the quilt top before you give it to your Long Armor. Now, you know, if your seams are pretty flat, I don't normally have a problem. They don't have to all go. If you don't have light fabrics and seam kick back the other way, I'm actually okay with that, long as it's not bulky seams. I purposely piece, like I told you all, I show you all the backs of my piecing because I don't want you all to think that I'm just sitting here preaching to you all, but then I don't do what I'm telling you to do. The front of my blocks looks just as good as the back of my blocks. I take pride in my piecing. I actually enjoy the piecing process. There is nothing wrong with pressing in between. You all know that a lot of times I sit here and I even use my wood press. But when I get through with parts, I wood press up to the point where I say, hey, you need to go use a heated iron. And then I heat press everything with a heated iron. And then the other thing I think when people are pressing is you're ironing. We're not ironing. We're not ironing a pair of pants. We are pressing. We are lifting that iron. We're not putting pressure and moving this thing. Because as you keep pressing and pressing hard across this with a heated iron, you're skewing your block. Notice that this is nice and square. Because when I press, I lift my iron up. I'm just letting you all see this because I don't want you all to think that I'm just telling you all this stuff and I don't follow. I am an advanced quilter. I know what I can do, especially in my sewing chats. When I'm doing something, I be telling you all, don't do what I do. I'm used to doing this. I've been sewing for a long time. So I know how to ease stuff in sometimes without putting pins in it. But if you're a newbie, that's not something that I'm teaching you how to do. And I'll say when I'm doing stuff like that, don't do what I'm doing. But all of my pieces are going to be just as pretty on the back as they are on the front. It's just something I take pride in. I don't have issues with, when I put my quilt top on the batting, none of my seams kick back the other way. It just lays and goes exactly where it's supposed to go. And then the last thing, my last tip on long arming, my daughter's sending me baby pictures. She takes photos every day, just so you all know. The last thing is strings. Y'all see me sitting here and I'm piecing and I go, oh my God, where that string come from? And I go and I attack that string. I cannot stand strings. Now, if you've got there are some times when you're piecing and sometimes you have a cross thread and it'll come up to the front, or some of your fabric itself may fray from your seam allowance and it comes up through the seams. I'm not talking about that type of stuff. I'm talking about when you got long thread tails because you don't chain piece, number one, and that's wasting thread. Don't chain piece to save thread. But when you have a lot of long threads and you're not cutting them, they come up to the front of your quilt when you're piecing. I'm not talking about the ones that come through as we're quilting. The machine is vibrating on your fabric and it's also going to pull up some thread. I'm not talking about those. I'm talking about having a scrap quilt where you've got 300-400 different fabrics. So you got all these different pieces and then you've got all of these straggly strings from all of these pieces, from your threads not being cut. All of this stuff has been presented to me before I even get it to the long arm. I hate to say this, This may be where I get in trouble. If you don't care about your quilt top, why should I care about your quilt top? If you didn't cut all of those strings, why should I cut all of those strings? I do cut if you give me a quilt top and your strings are like 75% off of that quilt, then I take pride in your quilt just like you would take pride in your quilt. And I go through and I clip any strings that I see. If any of them vibrate up as I'm quilting, I take care of all of those strings. But guess what? If you give me a quilt top and it's completely filled with just straggly strings, guess what? I'm not caring about it because I feel like you didn't care. And so I just quilt your quilt. Well, what happens when I quilt your quilt? I'm quilting over all of those straggly strings. Okay? Keep that in mind. It's a lot easier to get the straggly strings before it's quilted than after it's quilted. Because you're going to see it once it's quilted. Because it's going to mess with your quilting design. So clean up your quilt tops if you can before you take them to a long arm quilter. Sue says, I've been given a quilt that was almost wadded. Oh my gosh, they didn't press it at all. Jason says, I love when the backs looks as pretty as the front. Yes. Betsy says, Betsy Lou says, if you stuff several layers of batting scraps under the borders behind the idler bar, it will put pressure on the take-up rail and help you roll without fullness. So she's giving another tip. So thank you, Betsy. She must be a long armor. And she's giving a tip for fullness. So that's what I asked, if anybody had other tips to share. So thank you, Betsy. I have not done that. I haven't had to do that. The two techniques that I do use have been working for me. So I haven't had to do that, but I have seen where people say that they put like soup cans on the quilt to put pressure. They got weighted stuff that they put right up under the roll on the take-up bar to reduce pressure. So I have heard of people doing that. So that's pretty cool. Lily S says, I'm a new quilter, and I've recently discovered that ironing is my zen. Laughing out loud. Ironing, I don't love it. I have a friend that I think loves to iron, press. Her stuff is so flat, the seams ain't even thinking about going anywhere. And it's not one of those things that I love to do. I barely press my clothes, but I will take care of these quilt blocks, okay? So that's good that you're pressing. I'm getting better at making the backs look as pretty as the front. That's Diane. So that's good. And it's not like you're going to learn everything about quilt making overnight. And it's a ever changing thing. And it's really still all the same, which is so weird because I look at old quilters newsletter magazines, and I'm saying the stuff that we think is new, none of this stuff is new. It's just being redone with updated fabrics. So it's kind of weird in that way. And then a lot of times we have tips. We know we should be doing this, but as we keep learning stuff, we got so much in our heads about quilt making, all the notions and tools we're using and how to use that stuff. We forget to use the basic quilting techniques. We just forget. It's not that we didn't know. This is not rocket science. It's just that you're so in a rush to get things done. You're just not thinking. You forgot about that step. So we just take a shortcut. And sometimes the shortcuts work out when it's a small quilt, but it doesn't always work out when it's a bed-size quilt. Jason says, I find starching help reduce the amount of strings you get. Yeah, and he's talking about starching your fabric before cutting and before sewing. That helps to reduce the strings. So that's a good tip. Tucker Sewing and Quilting says, hey TN everyone, joining late today. Hey Tucker. Diane says, you should starch fabric before cutting. Makes easier cutting. Yeah, and I definitely starch. I don't put anything on my die cuts boards until it's starched, because if you don't, it's not gonna be the right size, especially if you're making like half square triangles or flying geese. You need to starch fabric that's being die cut. So I just incorporate starching my fabric. Even brand new off the boat, I starch my fabric. And I don't pre-wash anymore. I used to do that when I first started years ago when fabric wasn't made as well as it is. I think we got so many advances. Well, we have made so many advances, and now we're going to screen printed fabric. I hate that fabric. I want my regular woven color changes. I don't want, I don't like screen printed fabric. That's just me. I have a lot of it, but it's not my favorite fabric. It just isn't. Let's see. Make sure I get everybody's comment here. Lots of seams in the center can mess up a perfect border when rolling because of the space the seams take up. So that's another tip. Linda says, and I try to use my seam lines and I make sure that that is straight. That's what I use. I don't care about how much piecing is in the quilt top as compared to none in a border, because sometimes a border can be just one fabric. What I look at is, I look at a line through the quilt and I follow that line to see if it's crooked. If it's crooked, we got to do some stuff. We got to fix it before I baste it down. Michelle the Quilter says, hi, T and friends. Hey, Michelle. Linda C. Payne says, hello, everyone. Finally, I made it here. Received my new 1.5 inch die, 1 inch finish. Tomorrow is the day I begin. I think she's talking about the, she's working on the Boho Hearts quilt. She's in a sew along group. So, Sheila says, as a long armor, do you prefer seams to be pressed to the side or pressed open? If you're wanting custom quilting, that's the only time it matters for me. Otherwise, well, it's not the only time it matters. If you've got bulky seams, I prefer they to be pressed open. Like if it's a whole lot of half square triangles coming together, all 4 of them making pinwheels, I would prefer that they're pressed open. But they don't have to be. If you press to one side or do the spinning seams thing, again, just make sure you press those seams so that they're nice and flat. That's the main thing that we need to have, is nice flat seams and no heels in those seams when you send them out. So yeah, I don't prefer either way, but this is the thing. If you're wanting custom quilting, or you wanted me to stitch in a ditch, I can't stitch in a ditch if you pressed your seams open. Stitching in the ditch will go in and break your piecing seams as I'm stitching in the ditch. And then when I'm stitching in the ditch, I'm not catching on to anything but the ravels of the stitches, the thread that I've just broken. So your block is more likely to, your quilt top will start to open up in seaming spots of the quilt top. So I can't stitch in a ditch. So that would be the only thing. It depends on if you're wanting some type of custom quilting where you want it in a ditch. Then you definitely want to press your seams to one side or the other. Otherwise, it doesn't matter. If I'm doing an all over panto, it doesn't matter. That's actually very conducive for quilts that have the seams pressed open. They're going to be nice and flat. I'm going over them, so I'm setting everything and making it stay in its spot. So on that, it doesn't really matter which one you do, whether it's custom or edge to edge. I need water. I ran out of water. Excuse me. And I need sinus meds is what I need. And Betsy says the digital print is what you do not like. Yeah, this digital prints. Okay, so whatever they do with them, I don't like them. I feel like sometimes when the needle hit them, sometimes you can get little white spaces that knock some of whatever it is that they're putting on top. It seems like it's like plastic dye or something. I don't know what it is. And some people have said that some are better than others as well, but I haven't used it a whole lot. I just know every once in a while I can see where I got a little white spot because they start with a white piece of fabric. Misty, anything you want to share about optional block? Nope. Because that's next week. I do optional block next week. Other than if you haven't gotten yours mailed, please start getting them into the mail so that I can get them hopefully by Tuesday at the latest, because I just hate spending my Wednesday is one of those days when I'm doing the chat. I know I got to do the chat that night. So it depends on what I'm doing. I might be prepping for the chat. Now today I was not prepping for the chat. I just came in here. I just had to bring my whole hard stuff. And but Wednesdays I'm normally, like, if I'm doing a haul and all of that, I'm like pulling stuff in, moving stuff out. So it's a big thing. And so if I have other stuff to do earlier in the day, I'm trying to make sure that I'm not going to be rushing around here at the last minute trying to get ready for my lives. So that's why I'm not asking for blocks to be delivered on Wednesdays. And if they do, I just don't even worry about opening them. I just put them at the bottom of the stack at that point, because I can't be bothered with that at that point. I've already done the whole stack. Tuesday is kind of pushing it, because what if I've got something to do on Tuesday, like family doctor's appointments and things like that? Then, you know, Tuesday could also be bad. But I am saying at least try to get them to me by Tuesday before my Wednesday live. So, okay, Kevin, I guess I did have something to say. Lady Craft says, lots of great tips, Steve. Thank you. See you next time. And I didn't even realize we was 8:21. Oh my gosh, I gotta go eat. So we like Crumb says, hi TNT Quilters. Hello, hello, and welcome. Laura Lucas says, I am late, but I'm here. Hello, everyone. And we're about to leave in a few minutes, like really seconds. Betsy says, I'm trying to not buy digital prints when possible. My town has harsh water that fades it terribly when I pre-wash. Yeah, and that's what I've been hearing from some of the other quilters saying, you see, I don't even pre-wash my fabrics. And so they're saying that when they pre-wash the digital prints, they're already a mess. So I'm really sad about that, because a lot of people are even making their 45-inch wide. When it came out, it was for those big tapestry type quilts, because you know the quilt that won in the Houston Quilt Show, it was a digital print, and she did the quilting on it, was just fantastic. And so people really got into it, and so it was so well accepted because it won an award, so then everybody wanted it. Even the Dream Big panels used to be made like regular fabrics. They weren't all digital printed, I don't think, because I think my friend Debbie had bought one. Well, a quilter I know named Debbie. She had bought one, and when she bought them when they first kind of came out. So I'm not sure. I think they were regular fabric at that time. I have to check and see. Sandra says, do you know if you have received my blocks yet? If I have not posted that I've received your optional blocks in the group, then I have not. I post every time something comes in, I post it in the group. If you haven't seen your name come up, then I haven't gotten it yet. So check the group post for that. Good night, everyone. Thank you, Miss T. That's from Veronica. You're welcome. Good night, all. Leaving for church. Good night, Rosalind. And Diane says, wash in salt and vinegar to prevent fading. I don't know if that's going to work with digital prints. I feel like, I don't know what type of ink they're using. But, you know, people can try. All right, guys, so we're going to go ahead and end here. If you all got any more tips about long arm quilting, or the process of preparing your quilt for long arm quilting, whether you do it yourself or somebody else, you can always leave it in the comment section. Not the chat's going to be gone, so you can always leave your suggestions and comments in the chat, up from the chat, or for the chat people, inside the comments outside of this video. And it does take a little while for it to upload, for you to be able to comment in the comment section. Okay, so good night, everybody. You all stay safe, be blessed, and quilt out.